Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Messinio.
And I'm Steven Sigmund.
Welcome to the weekly movie Throwdown. It's week 2 of our look at Elmore Leonard adaptations, and this week we look at 2004's The Big Bounce and try to explain why it was such a terrible movie.
In this little slice of paradise, it ain't easy to find trouble.
She's practically undressing me with her eyes there.
But there I was, like a moth to the flame. Who is she?
She's one of those unfortunate girls who's turned on by the criminal types.
I don't know what you'd be interested in. I mean, I'm one of these poor, unfortunate criminal types.
What are you doing?
Turns out, I got a little more trouble than I bargained for.
Have you ever stolen any money?
That's a really bad idea.
What if I told you there was $200,000 lying around?
I think I'm gonna pass.
$200,000.
That's insulting. Do you think I'm that easy?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, maybe I am.
Now maybe I'll end up a loser.
You think I don't know you're up to something?
I put a few of her partners in crime in jail.
But the way I see it,
The problem is, wow, the stuff you say makes me kind of want to be around her.
You want to make out?
Easy.
if you plan on winning it all,
you have to do is walk in poor and walk out rich.
you gotta risk it all.
There goes that plan.
Warner Brothers Pictures presents
I'm beginning to think you got something going on.
a story about a big con,
I can't trust you. You can't trust me.
a little romance,
Wouldn't that make it a little more fun?
and two people who don't know the difference.
What the hell are you doing here?
Owen Wilson,
How does that turtleneck thing work? Does it keep your head on?
Morgan Freeman,
She's nothing but trouble.
What kind of girl do you think I am?
Well, you're the type of girl that had a gun on me 30 seconds ago.
Yeah, I didn't shoot you.
The Big Bounce.
You hit me.
Is that allowed?
Wow. This movie is something else. Even the trailer is bad.
Yeah, I have respect for the people that make trailers because trying to find something coherent to put into a trailer for this movie, I had to think was very difficult because the movie itself makes almost no sense. It's just very oddly structured, and there's almost no movie here at all. So trying to put together a coherent trailer, I give them credit for that.
It is, of course, an Elmore Leonard adaptation. It's the story of a small-time thief played by Owen Wilson who kind of crosses a real estate developer in Hawaii, Ray Ritchie, who's played by Gary Sinise. And Ray Ritchie tries to get Owen Wilson off the island, but he's befriended by a local judge, and the judge, played by Morgan Freeman, gives him a place to stay and a job, and Ritchie leaves the island, and while he's gone, Owen Wilson's character, Jack, takes a liking to Ritchie's mistress, Nancy, who is played by Sara Foster, and the two of them bond and decide to concoct a scheme to steal $200,000 from Ray Ritchie from his safe at his house. It goes awry, of course, and there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of people involved who you kind of suspect because of the writing of the film and because they're there, but it doesn't really all come together until the end, as everybody is revealed. Actually, it doesn't come together at all. That's kind of a big problem I had with the film, is that the end is a super dud. Yeah, it doesn't really come together at all. But I want to ask, are we only doing films with Vinnie Jones in this podcast from now on? Because we've done, 7 films, and he's been in 4 of them?
Yeah, I totally unplanned, but you can't go wrong with Vinnie Jones in a movie. Although, again, Vinnie Jones in this movie, don't even understand it.
Yeah.
Character is almost inconsequential, and the whole arc of that character is stupid. So, yeah, what a waste of Vinnie Jones. And what a waste of many, many people.
From top to bottom, this is a disaster. We've done Out of Sight last week, which was sort of heralded as one of the best Elmore Leonard adaptations, I think, at least in hindsight. Maybe not so much at the time, but it's kind of received that way now. And this goes to the complete other end of the spectrum. It's widely received as the worst Elmore Leonard adaptation, including from Elmore Leonard himself.
Yeah, and as we talked about before, it kind of puts the nail in the coffin of the run of Elmore Leonard adaptations that had been done in movies. So kind of starting with Out of Sight, and after this one, there really haven't been any more, and it ended up going to TV, probably to the benefit of all of us. But that's how bad it was. That they were like, all right, we're just going to stop here. So that tells you all you need to know.
It also puts a nail in the coffin of the director, George Armitage, who would do nothing else after this. After writing and directing Grosse Pointe Blank and Miami Blues, I don't think he wrote Miami Blues, but directed it. And he just went dark after this.
Right, and that's a good point to bring up, because he hasn't directed a ton of movies in his career in the first place. But after kind of getting an idea of how this movie broke down, I'm more inclined to think that he walked away because of this movie, rather than because of this movie, no one would work with him anymore. I think that this movie left a very bad taste in his mouth. And I mean, how can you blame him after seeing it? So I kind of get it. And we'll get into all that as to why he hated it and why it's a total mess.
Man, it ruined Hollywood for the director. That says a lot about this film.
Yeah.
There was a lot of stuff happening around this film and the production.
Yeah, I think that this is the example of why it's almost fun to talk about bad movies instead of good movies, because it's, first of all, I love bad movies, but this is not a bad movie you can enjoy. But it's fun to kind of analyze where a movie truly goes south. And apparently this one ends up going south in the editing process. First of all, what I want to mention is this: we didn't plan this either, but we did Out of Sight last week. Talked about how it led to the Karen Sisco TV show, starring Carlo Gugino. So Sebastian Gutierrez, the screenwriter of this movie, the credited screenwriter, is actually married to Carlo Gugino, and he actually wrote one of the episodes of Karen Sisco in the same year that this movie came out.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So this is tangentially connected to Out of Sight. We call that a through line, which is kind of fun. I didn't realize we were doing that. But so this actually does connect. And the thing that I was thinking as I was watching the movie, because not only is Sebastian Gutierrez married to Carlo Gugino, they do a lot of projects together. Almost every project that he does, she's involved in. I think that part of what ended up getting him probably this job was a movie he made in '98 called Judas Kiss, which is about a heist gone wrong. It's actually not a bad movie. And she stars in it. And most of what he's done subsequently, except Snakes on a Plane, which he did write the screenplay for. Everyone make sure that we mention that. Most other things that he's done, she's been involved in. So my first thought when I was thinking The Big Bounce was, I was curious to why she wasn't involved in the first place, because in the book, the character is actually dark-haired. And I found myself thinking that this probably would have been a good role for her, but it's possible that because she was working on Karen Sisco, or for whatever the reasons may be, or the character is supposed to be a little younger, and I'm not sure she could pass for like early 20s. That may be why she wasn't involved, but that was my first thought as I was watching it. So that was interesting, maybe just to me, because I love Carlo Gugino.
They did go with Sara Foster, who really, if you watch the trailer, she is the big selling point of this film. I mean, she in the poster, she's completely prominent while everybody else is kind of dwarfed. And in the trailer, she's like 80% of it. So it really seems like they were banking on her to make this into something people would go see. It didn't work, of course, but it almost kind of killed her career too. I think it's one of the first things she did, and she didn't do much else after this except host an Entertainment Tonight spinoff on MTV and star on Entourage.
No, actually, she did a 5-year stint on the reboot of 90210.
That's right. That's right.
That's actually what she did. And in truth, after watching this movie, I think that's actually the perfect wheelhouse for her. Character on a TV soap opera kind of show. I think that's probably better suited to her and her talents. Although I didn't watch the reboot of 90210, but I'm sure she did well in it.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, why? It's like remaking Roadhouse. You don't do it.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think she had a lot of energy on screen. And it probably wasn't her fault, but I think they banked on her a little too much and it didn't work out.
Yeah, so here's where we can. Uh, I'm trying to figure out when to get into the whole nuts and bolts of this, but I think that the problem right out of the gate, you're right that she's featured prominently in the trailer and seems to be the focal point of the movie. I actually read the book for this because I put in the hard work just to kind of see comparison wise. And the truth is, the character of Nancy is very much the equal main character of the book, along with Jack. But the problem with the movie is that the character and even their relationship is incredibly hollow. The book really delves into both of their histories, and it Nancy's character is filled out a lot more. So you understand more of her motivations of what she's doing and why. In the movie, I mean, she kind of maybe briefly mentions her mother, but not I don't even remember that happening. But a lot of this is she's been okay. This in the movie, Walter's character, played by Morgan Freeman, kind of mentions that she's been in trouble since she was like 15. They kind of often throw it out there, right? They toss it out, but the book gets much more into the psychology of her and how she's been using her sexuality to kind of manipulate men for most of her life up to that point, and has kind of figured out how to play guys against each other and use it to her advantage. And so when you have all that background, it's easier to understand what she's actually doing with Jack and why, and to think that there's probably something going on. And in a way, the book makes it very explicit that she's manipulating him for a specific reason. She's playing Bob Jr.'s character against Jack's character. Like all of these things are being done by her for a reason. Mm-hmm. And this movie does absolutely none of that work. It gives you none of that. Even the fight that happens between Jack and Bob towards the end of the movie, or like an hour into the movie, that fight, it's explicitly mentioned that Jack realizes that she is trying to get them to fight. She wants them to fight almost for her own pleasure. And this movie never mentions that. So the idea of her being really good at manipulating people and getting more into the core of who she is, which explains a lot of how the movie unfolds or how the story would unfold, is completely removed from this movie. So it makes her seem vacuous and almost like there's no reason for any of this to be going on. And that was my main problem with it.
I think that's a part of adaptation, right? I mean, you have hundreds of pages and you need to find a way to put that into 90 pages. And I think what they did here to make this adaptation, and I know Elmore Leonard was involved in it as well, but there's just a lot of stuff that's missing. And you mentioned the fight between Bob and Jack, and even that is just so uneventful. Like every scene just is like a dead fish. Like there's no excitement, there's no energy to it, and even a fight is just boring and feels like nothing happens.
Nothing matters. It feels like there's no real stakes in this movie. Like it actually feels like everyone's acting. Like there's really nothing holding the movie together that makes you feel like these people are truly motivated to be doing anything.
Yeah.
It almost feels like a look. And having Owen Wilson as the lead doesn't help because he really gives off big, I don't give a shit energy all the time. And so having him as the lead in this movie only adds to this lazy kind of lackadaisical plotting and moving along in the movie. The weird part to me is that the movie opens with a voiceover of his. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of closes with a voiceover, not the very last thing, but almost very towards the end as a voiceover. But at no other point in the movie is there any voiceover. And even that was jarring to me. It's making me think, were there other voiceover moments in this movie that they took out? It just doesn't even make any sense because what he says at the beginning and the end really have nothing to do with anything. I mean, his opening voiceover is useless. So there's so many things I do not understand about how this movie was structured or put together. None of it makes sense.
It's really confusing. I mean, I think the casting, there's a great cast in this film. I mean, there are a lot of good people. You have Owen Wilson, Gary Sinise, Morgan Freeman, Charlie Sheen. I mean, I guess that's debatable, but say what you want about that guy. I think he's a good actor. But,
Yeah.
you know,
BB Newirth, I mean,
BB Newirth,
yeah.
that's right.
Nope.
And you just can't, we talked about it last week where I said, I read an interview with George Clooney where he said after Batman and Robin, he was all about the script because you can't make a good movie from a bad script. You can sometimes make a bad movie from a good script, but you can't do it the other way around. And this is just an example of a bad script, I think, with a great cast, but I just think tonally it's really off. And I think there are just a lot of things missing, which is unfortunate because it could be an interesting story and it just isn't.
Yeah, so I learned from listening to them talk to Out of Sight, listening to the screenwriter talk about it. There were a couple of scenes where he specifically mentions that these are scenes they didn't necessarily love in Out of Sight, but they called them exposition scenes, where you needed something to be said to explain why certain things were going to happen. Like you had to understand why Karen was going to Detroit. And so there was a scene with her and her father at the airport to kind of explain, how she ends up deciding she needs to go there, right? I feel like The Big Bounce is a movie with no exposition scenes at all. Nothing is really explained to you so that the motivations make any sense. And what I learned from listening to the Out of Sight filmmakers is like sometimes that's important. You have to sometimes bring the audience along. And The Big Bounce has giant holes. And so I think that brings me to my main point here in looking at this and what I discovered is that the original screenplay written by Sebastian Gutierrez, his original screenplay actually keeps the setting of the book. So in the book, Jack is actually a picker. And the character of Ray Ritchie runs a cucumber company. Mason runs a farming company. And they bring in all these migrants to pick cucumbers when they're small enough to make them into pickles. And that's the job that he's doing. And Sebastian Gutierrez's screenplay actually keeps that part in it. And once it gets to the director, in the version that I've read, the director, George Armitage, kind of does a full rewrite of the script, removes that part, makes him a construction guy, a builder, and moves it to Hawaii, where it took place in northern Michigan. So that part's gone. You make it a construction guy, and the point of the cash that they're stealing was actually the money that he was going to pay the migrant workers at the end of their work shift. Like, they do a season and then they get paid and they all go home. And so that's what the money was. In this one, it's like a mob payoff, which is, again, like, I don't know what to make of that. Like,
we don't know who the mob is.
Exactly. We've never been introduced to them. I mean, so it's even that doesn't make any sense. So all this stuff apparently has changed with the new screenplay. But according to the director, the original cut of this movie was probably like an NC-17 movie.
What?
Yeah. So this is really interesting. He said the first time they showed the film, he said it came in at NC-17 instead of an R. So, and this does track because in the book, as I mentioned, Nancy uses her sexuality a lot. That's kind of how she manipulates men. So, she uses her body in a lot of ways. A lot of that is very present. And while I have no need for gratuitous nudity or any of that. In this case, it does play to the character, though. It explains a lot about her and how she uses what she has to manipulate the guys around. But neither here nor there. So his telling is that it comes in almost at an NC-17 rating. And Warner Brothers basically says it's unreleasable. So he comes back, we'll cut things down, we'll make it an R-rated movie. He said we made Grosse Pointe Blank. It was a rated R movie, and that did pretty well. But the studio comes back and tells him they will not make an R-rated comedy because R-rated comedies don't make money, and you know this. There was a whole thing around this period of time where this idea that you can't make an R-rated comedy and have it sell because you're losing half your market, all of this. So you get all these watered down comedies. So they tell them they don't want to make it R because it won't make any money. So they go back, and his feeling is like, you can't make it a PG-13 movie. You're removing Elmore Leonard from the story. Because Elmore Leonard, as we've seen from all his other movies, those are all rated R. Elmore Leonard tells a story in a very particular kind of way. And he's like, you're going to lose the heart of the movie. They go back and cut it into a PG-13 movie, which explains why this movie is only an hour and 26 minutes. It explains why there's giant plot holes in it. I think that the original movie, if it was a rated R movie, probably gives you all of the pieces that are missing. But Warner Brothers basically decides to cut all that stuff out to make it PG-13, therefore cutting out the entire movie. So you end up with a PG-13 movie that makes absolutely no sense and is almost unwatchable. And somehow that was preferable to them than releasing an R-rated movie that might make sense and actually make some money.
That's crazy to me, and I hope somebody lost their job because of this, because the next year, The 40-Year-Old Virgin comes out, and 2 years later, Knocked Up comes out. And that's the beginning of what we know as the Apatow era, which is all R-rated comedies. And they're some of the biggest grossing films of that time.
Yeah, so isn't that amazing? Like, we'll never know because this movie has basically been rabbit hole and no one cares about it. So it's not like no one's ever going to clamor for the Armitage cut like they did for the Snyder cut of Justice League. So no one's clamoring for this. Although in the interview I read with him, he does have his original version on DVD. So if you know him and you ever go to his house, he might show it to you. But he does have his version of the movie, which he says was very good and previewed very well, if you're to believe him.
Wow.
But once you know that, once you find out that this was supposed to be an R-rated movie, everything falls into place. Like, all the holes make sense. You clearly can see that someone who is not attuned to making films went in and chopped this movie up to try to get something to put out in a release schedule that was a PG-13 movie.
It really feels like it's chopped up the whole way through. And I was kind of okay with that watching it. I felt like, whatever, it's an Owen Wilson comedy. It's fine. But when you get to the climax, there's almost no pre-explanation of what's about to happen. And then it's just flat and almost so confusing that when I watched it, I didn't know exactly what was happening. But luckily, Morgan Freeman was there to explain to me exactly what I had just seen after it happened, instead of setting me up to anticipate it. I think it was the worst climax of a film I've ever seen. I mean, it was so dead.
Exactly. Yeah, when you have to explain the payoff, when someone has to tell you the payoff, you have failed. But even better than that, at the very end of the movie, Jack's character asks Nancy's character, how did that plan even come about? And she's like, well, it really just fell together. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what it seems like. There was no forethought or any planning at all. It just fell together because that's exactly the way it was portrayed. Like, there was no thought or process in any way about what was happening.
But the thing is, it couldn't have just fallen together. I mean, there are elaborate steps in this plan that involve like multiple people being in the right place at the right time. And then, but none of that is established until after it happens. And you're like, why was this person here? Why was that person there? Like, it was just so confusing. I mean, it makes a lot of sense that it would be chopped up. I mean, I would hope that it's not this bad on the page, but I would assume it was still not great on the page. Well, I mean, you pretty much explained that it was a lot better, but
I have no idea because here's the thing. I really tried to go to the mat for this one. I was trying to find the original screenplay to see if it existed, and it doesn't. Like, I even went to these sites where you can buy screenplays, and it doesn't exist. Like, you can't find it. So it's a mystery. We'll never really know what the shooting script looked like versus what we saw on screen. So that's kind of unfortunate because part of me now would really like to know, as someone who not only read the book but watched the original. I don't even think we mentioned that part. That there was another version of this movie made in 1969, starring Ryan O'Neal, and that movie actually works pretty closely with the plot of the book and how the book unfolds. Changes a couple of things, but for the most part, it plays off of the idea that this is kind of her show, that she's using him, and then her plan is essentially to double cross him, but in a different way than in. I mean, there's no other characters in the original story.
Really?
It's not like Walter and the wife, like all that stuff. That's why I was like, what the hell is going on with this? You introduce the wife, and then like a minute later, you find out that she's involved in the plot, where it's like none of that at all. The wife basically has no part in the book at all. None of that stuff is real. In the book, the basic idea is she wants to bring in Jack to help her steal this money from Ray. And her plan is that she is actually going to shoot him and make it seem like he was breaking in to take the money. She's going to take it and disappear. Like that was her plan. Like her that was the whole premise the whole time. But in the book, I mean, the movie touches this a little bit, but Ray ends up showing up first. She murders Ray. He doesn't get up and run away like in this movie, which is stupid too. Again, I don't even understand that at all. But so she murders Ray. Jack shows up, sees this, and calls the cops. And she like freaks out. She's trying to now manipulate him again into agreeing to concoct some story about how Ray came in, attacked her, and she ended up having to shoot him in self-defense. But the book and the original movie basically end with him walking out as the cops are showing up to arrest her for murdering Ray. And that's it. Even the movie like has this coda where she gets off from whatever she's being framed for in the movie, and she gets to leave. We don't even know that in the book. So the story really is centered around her and their relationship, and her finally failing in the final act to really get what she's looking for, the big bounce. That's the idea. She's looking for this one last thing to finally free her from what she feels like is kind of a prison of her own making. So again, all that stuff with the wife and Walter and everything else is concocted out of thin air. Nothing based in the original story whatsoever.
I kind of get adding some characters to a screenplay because that is going to develop like a B story for the film, and it makes sense. But it's interesting that all of them were incorporated into this climax the way they were, from hearing what you're saying about how different the book was. Were any of those people in the original film, or no? Nobody.
So okay. So getting back to the original film. So the original film follows the plot line pretty closely. But Walter really just is a person that takes a liking to him. I think he brings him in because he doesn't like Ray Ritchie, and just kind of hires Jack almost as a screw you and lets him work there. And it's kind of on the up and up. There's nothing ulterior about it. There's nothing going on. Jack's not trying to manipulate him. Walter's not trying to manipulate Jack. It's just, he's just a side character who kind of brings Jack in, and they both love baseball. And that's part of like their connection. So that's played very differently. So that character is there, but he's almost more benevolent and just kind of existing on the periphery of the story. Ray Ritchie is very much a peripheral character. Like, I don't even think you see him. If he's got one scene in the book, that's a lot. The character of Ray plays more prevalently in both the book and the original movie, because that's the guy that's kind of the driver of a lot of things. In the new movie, the thing with the wallets, about them robbing that house and then him trying to use the wallets to manipulate things, like that's actually a larger plot point
Okay.
of the original book and the original movie, about him trying to blackmail Jack to get money. And it's played very much as a peripheral side point in the 2004 movie, but it's more integral to the plot in both the book and the original movie.
It's surprising in the 2004 film because, I mean, I get it. By the way, Jack's friend, played by Gregory Sporletter, who is a fantastic character actor. He was in The Rock. He was in Clay Pigeons with Joaquin Phoenix. I love that guy. So it was good to see him. But he just hangs on to these wallets and then they're just gone for like 30, 40 minutes. And then all of a sudden they're back as some kind of a tool. And I mean, I guess I get that, but it would make more sense if there was more about them.
Well, what makes more sense, how it ties into the larger point, is they do bring this into the movie where she makes him find the wallets and then almost decides to use them as leverage against him to do the job because he's backing out. But then in the movie, she basically just like pulls her bathing suit off and seduces him and they go upstairs and that seals the deal, which really, after seeing the originals, kind of really annoyed me because it's just such an annoying cop-out. Whereas in the book and even in the original movie, she makes it very clear that she will blackmail him, that she wants what she wants, and that she will use the wallets as leverage to get him. Then when she starts to see that he's not necessarily going to play that, she softens on it a little bit, but it's very clear that she's going to do what she has to do. And that's what I mean, where in this movie, her character is just missing something. Whereas in the original characterization of her, I mean, she's no joke. And it's very clear she will do what she needs to do to get what she wants. And I don't feel like that ever really comes across in the 2004 movie. And without that characterization of Nancy and the lackadaisical, character of Jack in the movie, nothing moves along. Nothing feels propelled the right way for any particular reason.
Yeah, it seems like that, again, is a tonal issue. I mean, it's a comedy, so it has to be funny.
Right. And we'll never know if there were a lot of scenes that were cut that do more to play into their relationship, what she's really doing, that possibly fleshes out the hatching of the plot. Maybe she mentioned seeing Walter and Ray's wife having sex on a boat. Maybe you see that scene, and then maybe that's when we get them forming the plan. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that stuff was filmed. We'll never know. But all of that stuff could be helpful. If you're watching a movie, it'll be helpful to know some of these things, not just find out about it in the last 5 minutes.
It's really strange. Like the second act is just Jack and Nancy. And I mean, you're introduced to Gary Sinise as basically the big bad guy right at the front, and then he goes away and he's gone for almost like 2/3 of the film. And then he comes back with his wife, who's a brand new character in the third act. And then she's basically the mastermind behind everything. And I mean, it's just really confusing. I'm not a screenwriter, but I can see some pretty big holes in this that are obvious.
You don't have to be a screenwriter to see that something has gone wrong. We've watched enough movies to know that you can't pay off a third act with a character that you don't even know who shows up out of nowhere unless that's the point of it. Like Seven can bring in the serial killer in the third act because they've been building it up the whole movie. That's a fine third act reveal. Introducing the character in the third act and then having them be the focal point of the payoff, it is just like, I don't know if I've ever seen that before. I really don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's hard to wrap your head around.
And the other point that I'll make is that you said the whole second act is basically just Jack and Nancy together. It's like Jack and Nancy together doing some hijinks, almost like I don't even know how to explain, like a buddy movie or something. Where again, in the original story, that does happen a lot. Like the middle part of the book is essentially the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
But because you're getting deeper into the characters, you're finding out a lot more about what makes both of them tick. and it ends up giving you the background for what moves them to the payoff.
Right.
So that's why you're spending so much time with them. You're finding out more about them so that the payoff will make sense. Whereas in this movie, you're just almost watching unrelated hijinks, and it feels like they're genuinely starting to like each other. Whether or not that's true or not, as we find out at the end, but that's how it plays, and you don't even really get the idea that she's playing him or that he knows. And it would be helpful, even in that respect. It would be helpful to get some idea that you're aware of what's happening, so that the payoff feels more satisfying, rather than out of nowhere him just being like, "Yeah, I knew the whole time, and I did all this." Like it feels completely out of left field as well.
The thing that, as I'm thinking about it with the second act, I mean, to me, it almost seems like by the time you get to the heist, if she didn't have to have sex with him to get him to do it, it feels like it's almost the same relationship as it was from the beginning. Like he's pursuing her, she's feigning interest, but maybe like stringing him along. And then there's almost really no conflict for her to throw him under the bus at the end, it seems like. So there's no growth. I mean, there's nothing. It's an empty film.
No, she just comes off as kind of, yeah, she kind of plays, her whole character comes off as kind of a brat, just kind of like a brat that kind of sails through the movie. Again, whereas the original character of Nancy is kind of dark. Like there's a darkness to her, there's an edge to her, and you feel like she's genuinely dangerous.
Right.
Like when she shoots Ray thinking that it's Jack, like there's a malevolence to it that you feel. And none of that ever kind of plays with this Nancy. It's like she's floating above it. And then, of course, Owen Wilson's always floating above everything. And so you just, I don't feel invested at any point in either one of them. And I do not care, because they don't seem to care all that much. There's not a whole lot of stakes going on.
Yeah.
Whereas I said, I don't want to keep beating the dead horse, again, being book obsessed. But the idea is there have to be stakes for someone. And again, as you get to know the characters better in the book, and even in the first movie, you feel in a way that both of them are trapped, and that there are stakes for the both of them, that they're both trying to get out of situations that they both feel like they can't get out of. Whereas I don't ever really feel that with either one of these characters in this movie.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we'll pull a heist, it'll work. If it doesn't work, so what? And that's not really a great motivation for any story.
This is why I wanted to do this film, because there's so much to it that's just bad, and it's kind of known as one of the worst films of the 2000s. But I knew that it was also remade, so I think it's interesting to look at the original film and this one together. So I'm glad you watched it. I didn't.
Yeah, I'll watch it for everyone. You don't have to, because like most movies that take place in the 60s, it's deeply weird and not particularly good. Why did all movies in the 60s have music that was completely incongruous to the entire movie? Like they'll just drop like a weird pop song or like a nice little ballad or something right in the middle of the movie that makes no sense and doesn't connect to the movie in any way. That's just 60s thing. And then of course there's a random scene, whereas in both movies, the part with Walter and Jack takes place in a bar. But in the one in 69, for some reason he stays in the bar and then asks a girl to dance, so that we have to see groovy music playing and all of them dancing, because that somehow is something that also has to happen in every 60s movie. We're like, there's no point in any of this. So the one from 69 is pointless in its own way. But here's what I think, honestly, having seen every permutation of this now. So just a quick history on Elmore Leonard. I mean, he got his start and became famous writing Westerns.
Mm-hmm.
So the first decade of his career, he wrote mostly Westerns. And one of the movie Westerns that came out of one of his books was Hombre with Paul Newman.
Mm-hmm.
A really good movie. But that was where he made his bones. So the big bounce is very, very early in his career of transitioning from Westerns to crime. I think this might have been his second book, I think, in this genre.
Mm-hmm.
And to be brutally honest, it's not that great of a story. It's okay. Like, but it clearly seems like a person who's learning a new craft and we'll eventually get there. But we both read at some point that the screenwriters say that there's kind of only 1.5 acts in the book. And in some ways, that's kind of true. That the second half of the book is just one extended second act. There's not a lot. Yeah, it's not properly structured, at least for a movie. As a book, it works perfectly fine. You're just kind of staying with these characters. But it's not his best work by any stretch of the imagination. And that's why I'm really curious as to why this is the one they went back to. Like, they remade it. And I honestly don't know the motivation of that, other than the fact that it's possible they just own the property, that they already own the screenplay and decided the hell with it. Well, Elmore Leonard movies are popular right now. We'll just drag it out of mothballs and make it, rather than having to buy another screenplay. Maybe that's the only reason. But it did not deserve to be remade necessarily. It's not high on the list of must-see or must-read Elmore Leonard.
Yeah, even he didn't like either of the films. I mean, I read that he walked out of the premiere of the 1969 version 15 minutes into it. And after he saw this, he said that he is responsible for 2 of the worst films ever made, both from his same book. So clearly not happy with these. And I gather from reading a few things that he maybe wasn't happy with a lot of the adaptations that came from his work. But I would think that this one, it's certainly lowest on the totem pole for the entire world, probably the same for him. And just to talk about Owen Wilson at this point, this is kind of a weird time in his career too. A bit of a black hole, really. I mean, right before this, he made Behind Enemy Lines, which was his first and I guess only foray into action and an action lead. And then he made I Spy in 2002, which is another horrible remake of something that didn't need to be touched. And then Shanghai Nights in 2003, which I haven't seen, I don't think, but I can't imagine it's great.
You don't need to see it. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
But then he made this and then went on to make Starsky and Hutch and Around the World in 80 Days the same year.
Did he fire his agent after 2005? I feel like he probably should have fired his agent, because that's a truly bad project.
Yeah, but everything I just listed is coming off of an Oscar nomination for writing The Royal Tenenbaums. So he's gone from this Wes Anderson indie world to like ascending to a studio persona that didn't really work. I mean, it would go on to sort of right the ship a little bit with Meet the Parents and those things, but this was kind of a tough time for him. So it's almost fitting that he's in this.
Look, we've all seen this before, where you get that first blast of notoriety, and you can use it in one of two ways. You can use it to either pursue projects that you really care about and use it to further the craft, or you can chase that money, which everyone's throwing at you when you come off of an Oscar win. And I can't really fault him for that. For people telling him, we're going to pay you millions of dollars and we're going to try to make you a movie star. I mean, why the hell wouldn't you do that? Like, I would do it. I'm sure everyone would do it. So they're paying him tens of millions of dollars to do these projects and saying, we're going to put you above the title and make you a star. Like, sure. He went there, did all those projects. They all failed. And then he finally kind of finds his way again in what he does best. And so you can't really fault him for freaking out a little bit there and taking terrible projects possibly for the cash. And look, if someone came to you and said, we're going to make a movie on location in Hawaii, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'd agree to that. I think as I'm watching this movie, all I think is that Morgan Freeman seems like the only person having a good time. I think Morgan Freeman's like I've done everything I need to do. I get to do whatever the hell I want in this movie, and they're paying me a lot of money, and I get to hang out in Hawaii. He's having a good time. And we also failed to mention the strangest part in the movie, which is the game of dominoes.
I was going to say, this is why he's having a good time, because he's hanging out with these guys. He's playing dominoes with Owen Wilson, Jack Ryan, but also Willie Nelson and Harry Dean Stanton. I mean, that's a game I want to go to. Of course he's having a good time.
Oh, that probably would have been a better movie. Just
Yes.
filming that for an hour would have been a better movie than all of the big ones.
Absolutely. And Willie Nelson's in it a bit at the beginning too, but I think he could have had a bigger part for sure. And something I wanted to mention is that when they're doing all the stuff in the middle of the film, I don't really understand. Maybe I'm forgetting something, but they break into a house, and it happens to be the deputy's house. And it turns out they find out that he's gay. And I don't understand why that's there. They don't use that information.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I thought the exact same thing. In a movie where there's no plot and it's an hour and 26 minutes, the fact that that scene is in the movie and then doesn't pay off at any point again in the movie feels like one of the stupidest things ever.
Yeah.
What a waste. Clearly, they were trying to pad the movie to get it to an hour and 26 minutes. Think about this. Think about how many scenes of just people surfing or the water there are.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's a good 5-6 minutes too. Like, there's just these buffer pieces of the scenery. It's almost like a tourist video for Hawaii. You take that stuff out and that scene, and I think the movie's like an hour and 18 minutes, which is barely a movie.
Yeah.
So again, this just feels like they are taking anything they can and throwing it in the movie to try to scrape together a feature-length film. I mean, Jesus.
And that the deputy, there's a scene with him and Owen Wilson at the beginning as well after Owen's arrested. He's played by Owen's brother, Andrew. And if you close your eyes, they sound identical. So it's poor casting to cast someone as a complete stranger who sounds exactly like your protagonist. It's really bizarre. I love that they put him in there, but it kind of jarred me a little bit when I heard them talking, because it was like one person talking to himself. It was pretty great. But I do love Andrew Wilson.
And just in case, if you care at all, the whole thing with the harmonica, that's just a movie thing. In the original story, it's a comb actually that's missing.
Oh, okay.
But it never pays off. It's not like he finds it in the guy's house. None of that. It's a dropped subject after that moment, where he goes off on a thing where it's like, why would anybody steal a comb? You can buy a comb for like 10 cents. Like, what? Like, and it just dropped. It's just a thing that kind of happened in the moment, and then it moves on. It's not like he ends up finding the comb later on. Like, paying off the of all the things to pay off in the big bounce, paying off the harmonica was the least important of the things to pay off.
Yeah.
So the fact that they spent time to pay off that part just shows how terrible they were at plotting and putting this movie together.
Instead of paying off, say, the entire story at the climax,
exactly.
Let's put this harmonica back in.
Gotta make sure people are gonna care. They want to know what happened to the harmonica. We've got to tell them. The rest of it, they'll figure it out.
That really felt like a 2004 scene. Oh, this big secret that the deputy's gay. Who cares?
Yeah, especially now. It's even dumber now, where there's nothing to that at all. So, yeah, just a waste of time. But again, they kind of said it about the whole movie.
I'd love to see what the residual checks are on this film these days. I mean, they have to be nothing. There's no way that's.
I don't think they're checks at all. I think they're bills.
Yeah. You pay us for the privilege.
No.
Yeah. So the movie doesn't pay off, and it's just, we didn't like it. I generally watch the films we do for this show twice, and I watched this once and I thought about watching it again, and I said, hell no, there's no way I'm going to sit through that a second time. I know all I need to know. It's terrible. Which I feel really bad saying, because I love all movies. I'll never forget there was an IFC show that Henry Rollins hosted, Henry Rollins show, and he would have on amazing guests and talk to them. And he had Paul Thomas Anderson on. This was like 2006, before There Will Be Blood. That's what he was getting ready to make. And he explained all the production and everything, and he wasn't sure when it was going to come out. And what he said is that it's an absolute miracle anytime a film is shown on a screen, because there's so much to go through, such a heavy lift to get from inception to showing it. And so I've always taken that to heart. And I think I don't want to really shit on a movie, because I know there's so much work that goes into it. But it's really hard not to do that here, because I feel like so many bad decisions were made, and it was such an opportunity wasted.
Yeah. And the fact that we find out that this seems like a corporate screw job makes it easier to say that it's terrible, because it's not necessarily the people that were involved in the making of it, not necessarily their fault. Could be, but it definitely seemed like there was something else going on.
Yeah.
But I did forget to mention, though, my favorite part, which is they actually use It's Your Thing from the Isley Brothers in this movie.
Yeah.
And I just laughed out loud, because I'm like, that felt so desperate. Where it's like, hey, remember, this is an Elmore Leonard thing too.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Out of Sight. You should like it. Like it just oozed desperation. So I had to laugh at that.
Well, I think this is a really good example of how much the director weighs on how an adaptation is made. I mean, you have all of this material from the same guy and so many variations on what ends up on screen. I mean, the Soderbergh film is clearly the vision of a man who knows how to make a film, who has an idea. It's a small budget. And then there's this a couple of years later. And it's really fascinating. I love that there's similar material and then you get to see how that's interpreted. I think that says a lot for the director, and no shade to George Armitage, but he walked away after this. So,
and in a way, it's fun. That's exactly why we're doing this, because you look at all these adaptations and you can kind of see them, contrast them, and get an idea of what makes one better than the other, or what choices sink a project. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's fun. And obviously we didn't like this film, but really nobody did. It has one of the lowest scores I've ever seen on Rotten Tomatoes. The critics score is 15% and the audience score is 24%. I don't think I've ever seen specifically an audience score that low. Everybody seems to genuinely like something to some degree, but here it's very low.
Well, I think 10% of that 24% is probably just young boys who like to look at Sara Foster. I think it's probably lower, even lower than 24%, but that's just my guess.
Yeah, the kids who were sold on the trailer, I guess.
Exactly.
This had a $50 million budget, which I assume is like locational, like being in Hawaii costs the money. Although big cast, so the cast has to get paid too. The box office, $6.8 million worldwide total on a $50 million budget. So I haven't researched this, but it feels like it has to be one of the biggest losses in box office history. $3.3 million opening weekend. And opening weekend, this film came in 173rd. This was a dumpuary film.
On opening weekend, there were 172 movies ahead of it.
This is 2004 when they don't just show things for like a week. They still had things in theaters. This came out in the end of January, and it was beaten by Bad Santa at the end of January. Bad Santa beat a film that was opening. So it was very doomed on screens from the beginning. Boy, so many things beat it. It's really shocking. So I would not recommend it, and you probably wouldn't either.
Yeah, there are better ways to spend an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, there are better ways to spend an hour and a half with this director and this writer, because Grosse Pointe Blank was actually a very enjoyable movie. Miami Blues was a decent movie.
Yeah.
Sebastian Gutierrez ends up, I mean, his movies are okay, but he ends up finding his place also in long form television, much like Elmore Leonard ends up finding the perfect form for his stories with Justified. And I've said that before, I'll say it again. But Sebastian Gutierrez and Carlo Gugino end up working on 2 shows together later on in like the past, actually 5 or 6 years. There was a show called Jet.
Oh, yeah.
That like 2019, which is on HBO Max right now, if anybody wants to see it. But it's actually a pretty good story. I really enjoyed it. She plays a career criminal, like a thief, and it's pretty cool. And then just a couple of years ago, I think, they made a show called Leopard Skin. They made it for Peacock, which was pretty decent. Probably depends on the mileage that you get out of Carla Gugino as an actress. As I said, I enjoy her. But
I like her a lot.
It was definitely better than this. So if I was going to pick a project from Sebastian Gutierrez, I'd pick one of those 2. But yeah.
Maybe we can do a month on the 2 of them together. Or even just her. I mean, I really like her. I'd like to watch some more of her stuff.
She's been in so many things. I mean, like almost 100 movies at this point. So it will be a lot. But But yeah, and unfortunately, most of the things she's done with her husband are not the top of the list of the best things she's done. Except Jet. Except Jet really was enjoyable. So I would say that was a good one.
She's really great on that Fall of the House of Usher series on Netflix a few months back.
I have not seen that yet.
Yeah, she's really good in that. She's kind of like the central point of it,
Hmm.
but really good. Yeah, so this film's a tough one. Next week, I don't really know what to expect here because I haven't seen this film.
Me neither. We're both going in blind. This is a good one.
It's exciting. I did read that this film was cited in an article with Elmore Leonard that he wasn't a fan of it, primarily because of the director and the star, who are both the same person. The film is called Stick, and it's starring and directed by Burt Reynolds. So it's going to be interesting. I don't really know what to make of it. And I'm really looking forward to watching it because you brought this one to us.
You're saying people haven't had trouble with Burt Reynolds? That's like saying you're shocked that people had trouble with Chevy Chase.
Yeah,
So,
pretty much.
not particularly surprised about any of this, but it's going to be fun to get into it and see the movie itself.
And this is a 1985 film, so it's going to have that 80s kind of feel to it. And I did read a few things about this already, just in researching Elmore Leonard, so I'm excited to talk about it. Didn't go well from what I've read, so.
Yeah. We both know, though, if they had made Big Bounce in the 80s, they definitely wouldn't have cut it down to a PG-13 movie.
No.
We know that for sure. So let's see what Stick looks like.
Maybe remake it now. Why not try a third time and see how it goes in the 2000s, in the 2020s. I think they could do a lot. Maybe make it an A24 film now and see how it goes. I don't know. All right. Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. And you can check us out online. We're at patreon.com/movie throwdown pod. And we're on social media everywhere at movie throwdown pod. So track us down, talk to us. We're doing some fun stuff on social media now. It's been really enjoyable to put some clips up, especially of the Statham stuff from this month. So or from last month, because pulling clips for Statham is pretty great. Very absurd. So so check us out, and thanks for listening. We will see you next time. So long.